Hello, Tom.
Yeah, long time no see.
Yeah, good to catch up with you. How have you been?
Oh, well, I'm in excellent health, which is a really good thing at my age after having survived cancer last year. So I
Wow,
feel great. I feel great. Yeah.
that's good. And we are sort of done with COVID, but it's still a nice thing to not be sick in this time.
Yeah, we've managed to avoid it until now.
Meaning,
Oh, cute little doggy. Yeah.
Quinn
Yeah.
here. You said avoid COVID until now. Is something happening in your
Well,
family?
they say everybody's going to get it.
Oh,
And
right.
of course, as everything opens up, we're going to go to a 90-year birthday party next week. I'm going to go to a big conference with 800 people next week because everybody's opening up. That's when you get it. I'm probably
Right. Yeah. So hopefully it'll be mild and
yeah. Well, I'm also taking ivermectin pills on the sly as preventative. I love the idea of doing something practically illegal that the big pharma is trying to prevent me from doing
yeah.
so they can earn a fortune on the drugs.
Yeah.
My form of resistance.
Yeah. And it's, and ironically, if I understand the psychology correctly, whether or not it works, taking something that you think will protect you boosts your immune system.
Good. Whatever happens.
Yeah. Oh, good.
I'm glad.
So anyway, so two interesting developments. Oh, there's a few interesting things that have been going on. One, so I know back in January, I promised I was going to work on IGWET and try and build this manifesto and chat system. And I did at least sit down like a week ago and actually like clean up my open source project, which had like, bit rotted in the intervening year or so, where like all the packages were out of date and I was getting all these warnings and errors. And so I cleaned it up so at least it compiles cleanly. So, and work, I'm hoping is beyond the insane phase it was February and March. And I think this is a good sign. The last two or three times people have complained about the report, like the report is wrong, the data is wrong. It turns out reality was wrong and my report was correct. And so
whatever that means, you got to explain that one, of course.
So the idea is that like people look at the report and say, well, this number is bad because it says X instead of Y. And I look and say, well, actually, no, the number is X. Reality is Y, which is wrong. Like we're paying too much or we're miscounting something. Like one of our underlying business processes is broken. And the report is correctly demonstrating that fact. But they're upset at the report and they're yelling at me. They're not coming and saying, oh my gosh, your beautiful data has shown us that our business is screwed up. Please help us fix it. That is not the reaction that I get, even though that's arguably what's happening. And it says something about the relative status roles in this world, that is the norm. I'm probably over dramatizing it. People actually have not been that harsh, but that's what I feel like they're doing when they complain about the report. And so the fact that at this point now, if the reports are disagreeing with reality, it's usually reality that's wrong or the business that needs to change rather than the report needs to change. I think means I'm hitting some sort of steady state, which means I'm not like playing catch up because people are desperate because there's no data or the data is wrong. The data is actually now catching things. And that's like what it's supposed to be doing, right? It is informing us so we can make better decisions. Even if it's not the decisions we want to make, at least it's telling us something. So that's getting a little bit calmer. The other thing that's been happening is I am applying for this master's in decision analysis.
Okay.
I'd love to get your perspective on this because it was.
Did you know I just started writing a new book about decision making?
I mean, you write like one book a week, don't you? Right? So what? That's
yeah, something like
surprising,
that. But this week's book, and I have, as usual, I first concocted a new word that nobody's heard and made it the book title. So it's called decision-eering. In other words, decision engineering, decisioneering.
Really? Where did you come up with this word?
Well, about a week or two ago, I just sat down and decided it was time to write that book. So I'll send you the thing now. Oh dear, that's wrong button. And E-R-N-E, that's the right guy. And just send it off.
Wonderful. So what? So this is awesome. So so Minerva, I partly did this because actually I think it would be kind of cool to do it. Partly I did it because like I'm hoping my son will go there and this is a chance to build a connection with them. And partly because they have a really fascinating application process. I don't know if you've heard of Minerva. Have we talked about them before?
Who, what?
Minerva is the name of
Minerva. I know it from several places, not the one you're thinking about.
Right, this is Minerva University.
Okay.
Related to the Minerva project.
Right.
And so they started out, I think, as a software development startup, building an active learning platform. The point is that most people, when they bring education online, they basically just digitize lectures, both in terms of the experience and the content. And they said, let's turn it around. Why don't we figure out what is the right way to learn and digitize that? And they believe the right way to learn is basically a seminar format, where people do the homework ahead of time, do the reading or the watching or whatever, and then they come and try to apply it. And they built this data-driven platform, which tags who speaks, when, what, and so the teacher can go then and actually rigorously grade participation and insight. That was the first thing. And then the second thing is they obsess over this thing called an institutional skills language, which is very similar to a lot of your language kind of a thing, in that you figure out what are the important metrics that matter to your organization, you create a hashtag for them, and then you create this deliberate training process where over the course, in their case, of 4 years, they reward you based on how well you apply those concepts in new contexts. And so they built an entire education platform around this and a little bit of a consulting business where they help organizations build these institutional skill languages. And I don't know yet, but they started out with this technology, and then they partnered with the Claremont Colleges, the Keck Graduate Institute, to create an actual 4-year university, which is literally a global.
I know one professor from Claremont.
And the thing about this is that it's the faculty is all online. The students rotate among 4 countries or so over the course of their 4 years. So the freshman year is all spent in San Francisco, and then they bounce around the world the other 4 years. Because the point is that, like, you're not here for the content, you're here to learn how to apply these concepts in the real world. So let's drop you all over the world and have you learn cultures and work with nonprofits and governments and businesses to actually apply this stuff. So it's like the first educational institution that feels like it was designed from first principles around a philosophy of how people learn and what sort of people will make a difference in the world, rather than building on top of a few thousand years of legacy institutions.
Sounds very interesting. Now, what were you going to do with it?
So they have a graduate program, a Master of Science in Decision Analysis.
Right.
And I don't actually know what this means yet. But the fun part is that, I should tell you about the entrance exam. So instead of like SAT scores and things like this, which mostly measure your zip code, the kind of parents you grew up with and the amount of training you had, they have a purely geometrical exam you take that basically measures your spatial and reasoning and cognitive skills, and is independent of your language or your mathematical background or anything. So it's a fascinating concept. And then the other thing they do is they ask you to write an essay. And so I basically wrote mine on decisioneering. On the biggest problem the world faces is our ability to make coherent decisions together. And this is how I think we should solve it. And what I'm really interested in doing, I don't know if they'll let me do this, is I got an interview coming up, is to discuss that versus their purpose in doing this class. Because like my hope is that they actually created this class and this platform because they really think that like helping people make better decisions is the most valuable thing they can contribute to society. And now
quite possibly.
And now I will tell them I'm working with somebody on a book.
Yeah.
That
well, take a peek at the book. I mean, of course, the book is based on all my language ideas.
Right.
But it's completely focused on the idea of making decisions. And the earring part of it is saying, look, this is not wishy-washy decision making.
Yeah.
Remind me to get back to Dion, I think it is, in a moment. This is an engineering approach to decision making with a lot of quantification, multidimensional. Yeah, so you know Ray Dion, right?
Doesn't ring a bell, but you probably mentioned him before.
He wrote a book called Principles, and he is a chief and founder of Bridgewater, I think it's called.
Ray Dalio.
Ray Dalio, yeah, I said Dion, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Dalio, sorry.
Yes. Where did he's been coming up a couple of times lately.
Yeah, I've read his book, Principles, couldn't resist because I'm a principles guy.
Yeah.
And he then and I subscribe to his LinkedIn. So almost every day he posts a principle and some wise words.
Okay, yeah, we talked about him in the Changing World Order.
That's it. That's the
man. I may have bought this for my brother for his birthday.
Well, there you go. So you get to read it afterwards.
Yeah.
And just a moment. Let's see. I want to show you something he did, which is, I would call it wishy-washy decision making. Let's see. So and I just put him in the book so that people got another voice than my own.
Yep.
There we are. Okay. And wrong book, Stakeholder Engineering, Pages and Decision. Yep. Okay. Okay, now.
You want to share your screen or?
That's what I want to do now. Share screen and decisioneering and share. So that should bring you, can you see Ray's photograph? And
yeah.
Okay, so I just put this in today. He posted it like yesterday on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, in fact, let's, if you don't mind, let's
Sure.
go through it very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so find the most believable people possible who disagree and understand the reason. Okay, okay, fine. Raising the probability of being right is valuable no matter what your probability of being right already is. Okay, triangulate your view with believable people who are willing to disagree. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Believability weight your decision making. By the way, you'll notice in my impact estimation table, my credibility and evidence are there, but I'm doing it in a well-documented numeric way.
Right.
I document every shred of for the evidence and the source and all that kind of. Anyway, and then recognize biggest threat to a good decision. Now notice he doesn't really define good decision here.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't define it as being meeting your objectives, but he might.
Yeah, or
he doesn't. Yeah. Notice that all of this is blah, blah, blah words, all of it.
Right.
Making harmful emotions, decision-making is a two-step process. Gee, I didn't know it was only 2 steps. First learning, then deciding, okay? Remember that you're looking for the best answer, not simply the best answer that you can come up with yourself. Of course not. Sincerely believe that you might not know the best possible path and recognize your ability to deal with not knowing is more important. Okay, and then when you're responsible for a decision, compare the believability weighted decision making of the crowd to what you believe. Now,
to be fair to him, right? Like he mostly.
If that's the best he's got, I'm not impressed.
Well,
although he's actually a very impressive guy.
Right. So, I mean, the reality is he implemented this in a very rigorous, methodical fashion at Bridgewater, right? He's giving
us very rigorous.
Yeah. So this is just the Cliff Notes version.
So maybe anyway, I put him in a page in my book, and now notice my little joke here.
Yeah.
He doesn't even have a clear definition of a decision problem here, but he's a good guy. So let me share what he says. I'm letting you know what believable people who disagree with me think.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if he actually disagrees with you or he's solving a slightly different problem in a.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But I thought I'd hold him there as an example of, he's maybe a top guy, reputation-wise, in decision-making in the world. And this is all he's got right there. But you're right.
This is not all he's got. He's got like a ton of books and other stuff, right?
Yeah.
But
he doesn't, he doesn't allude in his whole 8 points to anything like a quantified notion of the problem.
Right. Yeah. These are maybe like you said, these are principles, and you don't have much patience for principles.
No. I have principles for being measurable. I have here's stakeholder engineering principles right here. Okay.
Right.
Here are basic stakeholder principles right here. Here are principles of stakeholder decisions right here.
Okay, so right here, let's look at this page. If I just looked at this one page,
yeah,
I would probably make all the same criticisms about this page that you made about Ray Dalio, right? There's no definitions of these terms. It's not clear how these are quantified, right? If you take it out of context, it's not obvious how you operationalize this.
Well,
fair?
Okay.
Fair? Okay.
Okay. Now, of course, this is in context.
Right. You have a context here, clearly.
With the book.
Right. Yeah.
There, by the way, are 2 or 3 pages up are examples of quantification and multiple.
Anyway, if you want to have a more fun conversation rather than picking on or defending Ray, I'd like to talk about the thing that you and I may have disagreed upon or possibly agreed upon last time.
Okay.
And
remind me.
So my critique of language is that it implicitly assumes a top-down hierarchical decision-making process.
Oh, by the way, before we go on.
Okay, sure.
Did you hear the news that Putin has shot himself?
You're kidding me.
Yeah, it's 1st of April, so I get privilege.
The thing is, knowing Putin, he may have shot himself for real just to demonstrate how incredibly buff he is. So it didn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily an act of suicide. I can imagine him doing it just to have the bullet bounce off his iron chest. So anyway.
No, I pulled that on my wife 1 minute after midnight. It really, got her thinking. I said, April Fools. Sorry about that. I just have to pull it. It's my good one. You believe anything these days.
Well, the truth has been stranger than fiction for a while lately.
Yep. Anyway, go on with your discussion.
So my critique of language was that it implicitly assumes hierarchical top-down decision-making. And my vision is moving from sort of vertical hierarchies to horizontal networks. And then you made a comment where it sounded like you may have been agreeing with me, but then you didn't recognize it. So I ended up thoroughly confused. So I thought we could start there.
Yeah. Well, basically, I think you were citing me way out of context. I wasn't describing my method one way or the other there. So I think that was my conclusion that this was not relevant. However, let's have a talk about it. I mean, okay. Now, number one, hierarchical top-down or sideways decomposition are not at all different from each other. It's a matter of rotation or perception.
Yeah,
they are
right.
There's a notion in both of decomposition into multiple parts, and it doesn't really matter whether you call it top down. But by the way, I've got to tell you a lewd joke that I can't say in polite American company, but we were in Brazil in about 1995 or something like that, and we're having a conference.
By the way, stop sharing your screen if you're into raconteur mode. Oh,
sorry. Which
sharing your screen right now? You can just stop sharing it so we can.
Oh, sorry. It says I resume share. There's nothing particular I wanted to share at the moment. Anyway. Okay. So, and there was this guy called Michael Jackson, which you've probably never heard of, but he's quite famous in Britain, one of the early
Okay,
authors.
not the American Michael Jackson.
Not the American Michael,
Okay.
but he's quite a famous methods guy, been for many years. He and I
Okay.
used to debate at conferences all over the world. Anyway, he and I were both holding lectures there. And this is a time when people have this very focused debate about whether you should do top down or bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
You recognize yeah. So now, by the way, one thing I understood very quickly about Brazil is that every male there fancies he is a playboy. And some of them really practice it quite deeply. Okay. Anyway, so I then wrote up on an acetate plastic slide, I wrote up a text and I put it down and I said, I will resolve the question of top down or bottom up right here and right now. And nobody will ever remember anything from this conference except this one thing. So what I wrote is, if you can answer this question, you know the answer to our top down, bottom up argument. And the question is, does a woman like to be kissed top down or bottom up? I thought that was great.
Right, probably no one else remembered anything else you said for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And no one will remember anything else we say for the rest of this conversation. I'll have to put the explicit rating on the YouTube.
By the way, you're not recording, or you are recording?
I am, yeah, we normally record.
Oh yeah, that's okay, but I won't tell you this next part when you're recording.
Okay, we'll save it for the after party.
Yeah.
All right, so let me, and to be clear, right, this wasn't really a critique of language. It was more just a reaction to the way our conversation drifted, which may have been anything essential. But let's talk about what I think is the interesting tension that I personally am working through, what I came up.
By the way, before you go on, are we finished with horizontal and vertical?
Well, no, I want to reframe that point.
Okay, because I still haven't resolved it in any way.
Well, yeah, let me clarify the tension that I am feeling, so that rather than like fighting straw man, which I may have engaged in doing. So my point is that when I was trying to talk about my problem space, I feel like the answer you gave me was, well, once you have the problem, you need to decompose it using these techniques. And I said, okay, like I can see that. That's an important thing. But in my context, it's that the whole idea of decomposition is not, I mean, it's not wrong, but it's not the most useful way for me to think about the kinds of problems that I'm dealing with. And the reason is that what made me start thinking about the term decisioneering and this concept of how do we get groups to make decisions together was not like I have a well-defined problem that I'm trying to decompose. I have a multi-sided, let's call it a challenge, in the sense that it's a thing that needs to be done, and we don't even have a clear articulation of what the problem is. We have different stakeholders who have a shared interest of some kind. And part of the challenge is to actually understand how each of these stakeholders sees the problem differently, and building is that, and so I think, and this is actually helpful for me to think this through, part of the reaction I had to the phrase decomposition is it implies that you have a well-defined artifact that you can decompose. Whereas what I'm doing is more like try to bring coherency to a set of overlapping problems or challenges. And in that case, decomposition didn't feel like the right word.
Okay.
Or the right approach.
Yeah, sometimes the word decomposition causes problems because it also means, like manure decomposition, the decomposing dead body. I've been, but I picked
that usage I'm actually more comfortable with, because a lot of this is mulching people's waste in order to turn into fertilizer.
Okay. Well, I've lived with it for a long time. I think I've derived it from, is it René Descartes?
Yeah.
And the French word decomposition.
Well, I mean, it's a very Cartesian logical approach, which is in fact my critique.
Now, let me go back. Now, you made several statements that I need to take issue with. You said something about Tom, you seem to assume you start with something very clear that you then decompose. And I said, what? On the contrary, what I experience is people start with something that is very unclear, and the only way they're going to clarify it is to decompose it.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so you're right. So maybe there's so here's what my belief is.
By the way, that was only my first remark of many potential ones. I will let you get on with it, just so you don't think I am done parsing this decomposition thing. Okay, there's a lot to say about it. I mean, I've written whole chapters of 100 pages in some of my books.
So let me actually make a retraction of my critique of the term decomposition.
Right.
Okay, so I think that, like, so what you mean is that actually you'll come with a team of people who are working on a problem, and they'll have a very vague sense of what they actually think they mean. And the way that you iterate them towards clarity is breaking the problem down into pieces, getting each of them to sort of clarify what they mean about those things. So you actually end up with a coherent, well-defined piece of a whole, right?
Something like that.
Yeah, okay.
Wait a minute. Decomposition is a tool to force people to articulate the component parts they assume are there. And if you get two different people decomposing to two different sets of things, it is clear they do not agree, and then they have to have a discussion. You know, why did you include AI in your set and I just had big data in my set?
Right.
Okay. It forces a discussion leading hopefully to one agreed view. You know, you can't have multiple unagreed views simultaneously and push on, because that's chaotic.
So this is the thing that is, this is my new mental model of why there was let's call it divergent, because it wasn't necessarily even a disagreement.
But divergence, right? Okay.
Right? Okay, and I think that the examples that you cited were primarily in the context, or at least the ones I remember, of like you meeting with like a small group of executives or decision makers who are trying to formulate strategy for organization, which will be trickled down to all the different sub-teams.
Yeah, it's one context I often refer to. Yeah.
Right. And I realize that that's the case. And and my context is sort of let's call it complementary to that, in that the key to me to actually making progress was to stop, because I started thinking in terms of a hierarchical thing, right? And then I realized that the executives actually don't actually know what's going on and what the real problems are. They have a problem that they're worried about, which is they want to know X. But then, you know, the logistics team has a different vision of the problem over here in terms of inventory. The support team has a different vision, and no one of those is, you know, correct or complete. And what I have to do is, rather than thinking in terms of, and so I think this is the thing that in my experience is what was frustrating, and once I got past it, it was illuminating, which is that there is no team that shares a coherent view of this problem. The problem is actually
careful. Let me stop you there. I think I need to stop you more often. Otherwise, you go through 5 different things that I have problems about. Okay, so people's mental model is rarely the same as anybody else's mental model. And now, if they operate with their mental models in 5 different heads, there's going to be conflict. You know, they will be all solving their problem with strategies that don't fit for anybody else's problem, and everybody will argue. So I said, okay, so there's a prerequisite for teams of any kind, including organizations, working together. And that is they have a common and agreed and clear set of objectives. That is a logical prerequisite for teamwork. Okay, now it doesn't mean that different individuals don't like to look at different models of the big picture, okay, or specialize. That's okay, but the team, at whatever level it is, the top management team, the organization, the IT project team, they logically cannot have multiple but different primary objectives for the whole team.
And that would be, so, and that is, right. And so this is the interest, this is arguably a good definition of a team.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, but this is precisely my problem.
Okay.
Is that I'm not working with a team.
Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either. That was the shocking part, was that even though we are nominally.
Okay, so let me take it one step further. Let's I assume you're dealing with an individual you have to deal with, a client or boss.
Not really.
Well, I mean, okay, so it is multiple people, but not a team.
Well, the thing that is fascinating.
Well, tell me what it is. I mean, put some more flesh on it because I can't discuss it then.
Yeah, so I think the mental model I have found useful is thinking of this, and I'm just kind of developing as I go along here, is thinking of this as an ecosystem rather than an organization or a team.
Okay.
Right,
but,
because
an ecosystem is an organization, and an organization is
an ecosystem.
They're different labels, just different labels on.
But you made the claim. You defined a team as where everyone has a shared mental model.
What I meant by the word team, I admit, was they believe they are working towards some kind of common purpose.
Yes,
and they're all,
exactly. But an ecosystem,
like winning the football game.
Right, but an ecosystem, the predators are trying to eat, and the prey is trying to avoid being eaten.
Yeah.
They have
okay. No, an ecosystem is. Yeah, an ecosystem is not a team in the sense of consciously working towards common objectives. Yes. That's for sure. It just is.
Well, it's not okay. And then in between, we have something called a platform, right? Where a platform has different sides, and each side has different incentives. And if you have a coherent platform, all the incentives work together to reinforce the health of the platform, right? The suppliers don't screw the consumers, and the consumers don't screw the suppliers, right? Even if their incentives.
The ecosystem is in balance.
Right, and that's the interesting idea, because when I worked at Apple, it was a team. It was a coherent organization with an alpha male that stamped everybody with the same mental model, right? He would bring the top 100 people into a room, and they would socialize their meme pool so that they all were on the same page, and they would act as the divine messengers to convey the received truth to everyone else, and everyone else would swear allegiance to it or be incinerated, right? It was great. What's funny is that as much as we like to think that we are that, we're not. We are a bunch of different people with all sorts of local knowledge, local incentives, and that mental model of being a unitary organism with a single conceptual framework isn't terribly useful.
Well, okay, now stop a minute, because the fact that you're on a team committed to working towards common agreed objectives doesn't mean that the individuals in the team are identical. They're only identical in that one respect. They may have very different,
but like,
everything else.
I don't think
it sounded like you're saying they were very different, all the people on the team. And I said, of course they are.
But there's such a they have fundamentally different objectives.
Right. Each individual, as an individual, has fundamentally different objectives, right? But that's in the role of I'm an individual. The moment they say I'm joining your football team, and I know that the common objective is to win the game, then you're on that team. But that doesn't mean they don't simultaneously have objectives to be the one who scores the goals most.
Right. So there's objectives and intention, right? But what's interesting to me is that and maybe it's a continuum, right? Because there are some, there's a wonderful book I read called Meeples Together, which is an analysis of cooperative games. And it talks about what makes an interesting cooperative game is there is this tension between the shared goals, like you all want to defeat the bad guys, but the personal goals, but you want to be the one who,
right. That's
gets
what
the most
we're
experience
talking about now.
treasure, right?
Yeah.
But this is different than that.
Okay.
And
Explain.
It's a bit of in that the way the system is set up, each of the players has a fraction of the overall goal. And
I'm sorry, I don't, wait, I don't know what it means. Has, in what sense, a fraction, has responsibility for, or what?
Well, the practical reality is everyone comes to me and says, okay, there's this situation, there's an external thing that happened. And like, we have to do something about it. And person A says, well, I need X. And person B says, I need Y. And person C says, I need Z. And I don't actually have the option of getting them all in one room to share their pieces of the puzzle to say, what we really need is W, which is the rational intersection of X, Y, and Z.
But that is not a logical necessity.
Okay.
Because there's something called WinWin Win. That is, let's see if we can give everybody what they want or an awful lot of it.
Right, exactly. And this is the thing that, but like in this sense, I don't really think of them as a team by your definition, because they have not actually agreed on shared objectives.
No, okay.
Not necessarily enrolled in that
let's go back to my, by the way, I have given you my stakeholders engineering booklet, right?
Yes, you have.
Whether you've read it or not is a different matter, but you have a copy of stakeholder engineering.
Yeah.
If not, I'll send it again now.
Right. But yes, you have.
Okay, so now the stakeholders I'm referring to are basically not a team of any kind.
Okay.
But there may be a planning team, let's call it the top management of an organization, that is planning to satisfy some set of those stakeholders to some degree. And their common objective is to, let's say, maximize value satisfaction at the lowest possible cost.
Right. So let's call this is what I sometimes call the adult in the room.
Yeah.
Someone who says, hey, let's like take ownership for the whole problem and make sure everyone is happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
no, absolutely not make sure everyone is happy.
But they optimize the viability of the entire organization by taking into account all the different interests.
Something like that. I would formulate it slightly different.
Or, whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So like, yes, in an ideal world, there would be a planning committee, some central coordinating body that incorporates all these things. And what's fascinating is
what do you think God does?
That is a different conversation that you and I can have some other time. Because I don't think God operates like a central planning committee.
No, more like a dictator.
well, not the way
Just joking.
Yeah, you heard the joke, like, to dear Illuminati, like, we're sorry, please come back and rule the world for us, because it's kind of a mess right now, right? It's like somebody's laying down on their job if there's supposed to be a central planning committee that's orchestrating everything. My uncle still thinks that no, the central committee actually wants the world to go into chaos and destruction, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. So that's more plausible than a lot of the alternatives I've heard. But regardless, the interesting thing is that it feels like that, right, and this is what's interesting about platform dynamics, in that there could be a logic to the platform. And when we think about, like, if you're of an ecosystem, right, a balanced ecosystem actually is sort of self-regulating and self-correcting, even though no individual participant is aware of it. There's something in the fundamental dynamics of the platform. The herbivores get too big, then the grass goes down and then their population decreases and it goes back into stasis, right? There's something about a well-designed platform, if you have non-adaptive participants, can be stable. If you have complex adaptive participants, then they will end up gaming the system, right? So the interesting thing for me, and this is like you said, like, yeah, right. So is that there is no central, I guess let's call it executive function, to use sort of the neurological idea, right? That's the executive function of the brain that understands all the different drives and impulses and tries to synthesize them into a coherent plan of action, right? Is that approach is not feasible. And what I end up doing feels similar to that, but meaningfully different, which is that as the platform designer, for lack of a better term, I understand that these different people have these different incentives. And my goal is to figure out how to harness those incentives to strengthen the platform, which may not be anybody else's objective, but that's sort of my objective. And if I can satisfy enough of the other stakeholders, I can get away with building a viable platform. And that's the thing that will actually, I believe, give everyone in the ecosystem an optimal long-term outcome. And so it's I mean, spiritually, I think it's very much the same thing you're talking about, because I'm sort of internalizing all these things, but it's not as formal or rigorous a process as if you actually had a bunch of actual human beings sitting in a room together representing those different interests. And that was, yeah. And that's what I was talking about, but that was kind of where I was trying to get to, was that tension. Okay, I'm stopped now so you can comment.
No, I understand. There's a situation of consciously planning, humans consciously planning, one or more, to change or improve a system. Then there's the idea that a system exists which is to some degree self-regulating. You could even say self-replanning. Mm-hmm. Although some humans might have constructed that system for exactly that purpose. Okay, so there's
or at least they originally constructed it for some purpose and then it evolved into some other purpose is usually what happens.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Now, let's see. And then there are all these stakeholders floating around that hardly know about one another, or care about one another, and have all their needs and powers and everything. And that's what I write about in the stakeholder engineering book. You know, the inevitable chaos of that. Okay, now, so can you formulate now a question or a problem very succinctly in this domain that still is bugging you?
No, I think that, I mean, sorry, there's so many levels of the word problem in the domain that I like, if you're saying that, like, I feel like I've been able to articulate to my satisfaction the distinctiveness of the kinds of challenges I face versus the getting people in a room so you have a team with, another word, so I think the other word that keeps running through my head is the idea of enrollment, right? In an organization.
I'm not hearing the word. The other word is?
Enrollment.
Enrollment.
Right, so when you join a football team,
signing up
is that, like, okay, we all have our own objectives, but once you're a member of this team, we all want to win.
Yeah.
Right? And that's an enrollment. Okay. And the idea is that and what's fascinating to me about a platform is that so there's a continuum from, let's say, an ecosystem in the wild, right, where there's no central authority whatsoever except perhaps God, right, where all the participants are just doing their own thing, and versus, like, say, Apple on the other extreme, where you have an alpha male dictating everything that happens down, you know, and there's great freedom within the rules, but it's always really clear where the central authority is. And there's probably a continuum in between, like America is kind of halfway between a wild ecosystem and a top-down federalism, maybe moving more towards the wild ecosystem in the last 18 months or so. But what's interesting is that, and so yeah, so the acknowledgement that there is this spectrum and that getting the right stakeholder, getting the key stakeholders in a room to form a coherent decision isn't always a viable option, so then what? And that's the interesting thing for me about decisioneering.
So can I reformulate that as a test of whether I've understood? How do you make non-perfect planners plan more perfectly?
No, absolutely not. That's not at all.
Sounded like it to me. What were you saying?
What I was saying is that when there is no central authority,
right,
that has a coherent vision of the challenge or the problem, how do you build a platform that allows participants to usefully coordinate action despite their lack of a coherent shared vision?
Okay.
This is the
sounds like Datocracy. This sounds like Datocracy is the answer.
Well, yeah, I think it is. But this is what's interesting is that and this is, to me at least, maybe this was obvious to you, but it wasn't obvious to me before this conversation, is Datocracy does not require a central planning committee that actually understands the whole problem, right? That can define all the metrics and all the things in advance.
Datocracy is an ecosystem where, in fact, a series of problems are passing by, and the treatment of those problems is determined by the individual datocrats' values.
Right, and what's interesting to me is even the word problem I'm kind of reacting to these days. I don't know if you know the etymology of the word problem.
Yeah. What's your problem with problem?
Is that I believe it comes out of the Benedictines and the early universities where they would have an entrance quiz. And by definition, a problem is something that is posed by an authority that has a single right answer.
Oh, I have no such notion.
I understand that, right? But then a lot of the times when people get into problem solving mode, because people have been brainwashed by 12 years of American education, and it's probably worse in Asian countries, that's what they think. And if they have a problem that doesn't have a single right answer, it's more of like
the single right answer is far from anything I ever imagined.
That's why I've been playing with the word challenge.
A problem is a thing that is looking for solutions.
Right, and the whole point is like even solution is like problem solution is a pairing that
I said solutions with a plurality, S.
Right.
In other words, any number of solutions, even a series of them implemented in time,
right,
is my world.
Right. Yeah. So so I think conceptually you and I are probably on the same page, but you have a very sophisticated, nuanced view of these words. And in my problem, my concrete life problem is, and maybe this is actually a self-similar thing, is that I need to stop thinking of this as a problem and start thinking of it as something else, right? It's like, oh, this is a problem, therefore I want a solution, as opposed to this is a challenge and I need to figure out a graceful way of responding to it. So I've been playing with challenge response rather than problem solution.
Well, that was exactly the word I was thinking just before you said.
Right, and so the idea of
I didn't realize you were hung up in some culture of the word problem that I was not even aware of.
Right, yeah, and so actually so yes, I think that's, this is maybe a good point of agreement and alignment to call time on, though we have 10 minutes left if you want to go on something else, is that this idea that we have an ecosystem which undergoes a series of challenges, and then you want to build infrastructure or habits or culture or something that enables it to respond more adaptively to those challenges. And it's not like you find a right answer to the problem, but you have, and I've been going with adaptive versus maladaptive. Like some maladaptive responses destroy the ecosystem. An adaptive response allows the ecosystem to thrive. And so that's kind of the mental framing. And for me, at least, coming from a very strongly hierarchical organization like Apple, having to unlearn that was a big deal.
Right. I'm actually looking at my language glossary, not the full one, and looking at the word problem. Gee.
You define it.
Problem. Language. Have I actually defined problem as such? No, not in the competitive engineering glossary.
Ah.
I use it all the time. No, but that, but I'm looking at my 10% glossary.
You want to find your unabridged version?
I've got my 100%. Let me get the really big glossary. Oh, come on, be kind glossary. There we go. The really big fat one. I just wonder if I've, taken the trouble to define it for a reason. View page thumbnails. I'll go off it. There we go. And good. Now I've got everything. Problem. I did define it. I just didn't put it. It's
bring it up on screen so we can see it.
Yes, certainly coming up. Zoom, share screen. Now you can see it.
Full priority procedure problem.
So there it is. A question to be considered, solved, or answered. That's all.
It's a question.
I did that in 2003, 20 years ago. So
yeah.
And let's see.
You define question.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's quite fundamental to the whole of language, because language is about posing problems and suggesting and evaluating solutions. That's the whole thing. But it's a very, very general word, and people use it in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
Problem definition.
Okay. Okay.
Different. It's a statement of a problem that implicitly needs one or more solution options. Notice the plurality.
Oh, look, I love the thing above it. You talk about the problem with problems. I think you actually nailed it right there pretty well.
Oh, where are we? Where are you?
Point 3, right there under your cursor.
Oh, the problem with problems. I remember, I haven't read this stuff for 20 years. I just wrote it. The problem is that even though we may solve a simple problem, real problems, many more dimensions, right? There are many dimensions. The fact that problems are always more dimensions than you are currently considering, no matter how many dimensions you are considering, because you're never considering infinite. The real problem is so complex, we cannot figure out very well in a pure design process. We need to try out our solution step by step, seeing how each step works and using feedback from it to decide on the next incremental step. This is the approach of evolutionary project management, which is a core philosophy of mine. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's the interesting thing, is that, like, and again, this is more my personal journey, right? Is that, like, I was trying to find like a group of people who would sit in a room and clearly define the problem so that I could then solve it. And I realized that mental model was not working for me. And therefore I had to sort of move beyond that. And one of the ways that I personally moved beyond that is by trying to think in terms of challenge and response and a platform rather than a problem solution team.
Yeah, I'm going to send this glossary to you so you have it squirreled away somewhere. And if you wonder what Tom thinks about any one of 700 terms, you can look it up.
Yeah. So did you find question or solution in there since we had those?
Haven't looked yet. Which one? P? Okay, question, probably, yeah. Question of intent.
No, yeah, so you don't actually define question, which is, not a,
yeah, by the way, I mean, question is, I'm quite happy with the dictionary definition of many words, and that's probably one of them. Now, you said question, and then what was the other word you asked about?
Solution.
What? Not hearing.
Solution.
Solution. Okay, well, I have many synonyms for that, but I do definitely
Passed out, people.
solution.
Expected to lead to a partial or full satisfaction of a set of attribution requirements to solve a, interesting there, but like, and I think that's exactly the qualm I have about the words question. Like I looked up the dictionary definition of question, which is a sentence worded or expressed so as to elicit information.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right, but the point is that like, I don't have a question, I have a challenge, right? Is that nobody has actually worded the problem in a useful way.
That's normal. That's normal starting point.
Right.
99.9% of the time.
Right, but the thing is, I don't have anyone who's even going to agree on the question.
No, but you could start with saying, should we try to get agreement?
There's no we. That's my problem.
No we. Okay, I'm lost here now. If there's only one person, then you would, okay, there was one thing, a remark I was going to come with, I didn't get to them yet. Let's assume there's only one person involved.
It's not like there's a we, but there's a them. That's the challenge.
Well, okay, but let me take this one and be done with it.
Okay, fine.
If there's only one person, and I say, my problem is getting this platform squared away or something like that. Now, what I find is that most people can say that and they know roughly what they mean by it. And if I kept on asking them sub questions, they would give me a lot of detail about it. It's all in their head, but they have not, in fact, written it down and stabilized it and agreed with themselves. That is, if they were asked the same set of questions 1 week apart, there would be different sets of answers coming out because it's random.
Right, sure.
So in other words, this analysis process of what do you mean, one human being, this is in my life design book, by the way, where the problem is I'm designing my life, right?
Yeah.
But you really have to write down what you think are your values. You can't just say, oh, I value a lot of good shit. I mean, it's just not good enough.
Right.
You have to be very specific and decide today, what I'm writing down, this is my best shot at saying what values I have. I'm at liberty to change them at any time, but right now, these are my values and I want to find strategies to satisfy these values right now.
Okay, now can we get to my question?
Yes, of course.
Right. So the challenge, the situation I am in, and this is a bit of a caricature, but it's a useful caricature from my perspective, is that I have an ecosystem of participants, each of whom has their own interests and objectives. And I cannot get them all into a room to agree on a question.
That's not a necessary prerequisite for anything.
Okay, but the way your system is defined here, you must have a worded question in order to engage in the.
But the beauty about words is they can be moved around from room to room and people can vote on them.
Right, yeah, and that's why I'm saying that this is where.
So literally getting people into room to discuss is not a prerequisite for agreement to a stable set of objectives.
Sure, but the point is that like this is where like I find, like I said, I don't think we're necessarily philosophically in disagreement. It's just that like I object to certain words because of their cultural baggage.
Fine, yeah. That's a danger, and you have to watch out for it. For sure. By the way, there's one option, which is it's very chaotic out there and people are very unstable. So what you can do is work out a good first iteration that you think would have some popularity, and you lay it on the table and say, I think this is what we need, but I'm very open to modifications so that we get greater and greater agreement.
Yeah, actually, with certainly, and that's here's the life hack or the design hack that I have found actually works, is that I maintain internally a coherent rational taxonomy of what I consider ground truth. But then for each individual ecosystem participant, I have to sit down and do what I call language design. I have to get them to sit down and articulate what they want and need in terms that are emotionally resonant for them. And then I go through a process of defining what they want in terms that I can understand and cycling back and forth until we agree on the language design. And then I write a custom adapter that translates ground truth into their peculiar language. And that, in fact, this is, I was telling Anish, who was here before, I was telling, in the future, all knowledge work will really be language design. It's sitting down with other human beings and coming up with a mutual language, like, okay, in this context, for this narrow slice of, so like each individual person has a problem. Like I can sit down with you and say, okay, what is the thing that you are concerned about? You and I can agree that we're going to word this in a way that you and I understand what that means, and we can define a language for us to talk about it. But what happens is that it's a series of point-to-point conversations with individual participants rather than a shared master data model that unifies all of them in a single coherent schema. Now, hopefully, I have a set of piecewise schemas that are locally consistent and do not corrupt the global data pool. But that's a
impact estimation tables would give you some sense of the whether things are consistent with any higher level of thought.
Right. Yeah. But it's not even clear that there is a higher level of thought. There may just be a higher level of action. It's interesting.
By the way, I have one parting remark.
Sure.
I think you will find that the exercise of finding and agreeing scales of measure, I refer you to my booklet, Quanteering, as the very focused book on that. That is a really very interesting exercise that is different from playing around with a set of words.
Right. What's fascinating to me is that the way that it's not playing around with words, by the way, it's actually defining a schema. Right. And the thing is that they think of it as we're agreeing on a set of words, but I'm actually writing it down as a formalized schema that translates the words that they care about into our underlying data model that nobody else knows about or cares about. But that's actually the thing that everyone needs.
This sounds like language to me.
Yeah, it is, except that it's not really meant for humans.
Language is designed to be read by and understood by computers.
Right, yeah, so in that sense, it is that the, and maybe that would be a fun thing to do next month if we don't have a better idea. I could walk you through the tool I built to help me do this, which is an open source project.
I'd like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's called CQML. I'll send you a link if you want to browse it. It's really cool. I just hacked this together to like help me function and solve my immediate problem. But it's basically a tool for rigorously encoding localized language definitions as part of a larger coherent data model. And it'll be interesting to see if it actually works, outside my own brain. All right, I gotta go. Thank you so much. This has been a blast. Stay safe.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.